feel like I really understand that we have a responsibility to change the narrative around what we are delivering to young people in the classroom. But I would describe the actual day-to-day learning side of things very challenging.
Ambition that clearly had not found an adequate outlet in academia. He found it. There is a particular kind of man who moves through the world so smoothly that people barely notice him arriving. He doesn't announce himself. He doesn't need to. He simply appears, well-dressed, well-spoken, entirely at ease, and suddenly he is everywhere. At the dinner party, on the red carpet, in the official photograph, and eventually standing at the altar beside a princess. That is Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi in a nutshell. But a nutshell, in this case, is wildly insufficient, because when you actually sit down and pull apart the layers of this man's life, the ancestry, the business empire, the broken engagement, the child who changed everything, the wedding that the world almost completely missed, what you find is not the polished supporting character the tabloids initially tried to make him. What you find is something far more interesting. A story that spans centuries of aristocratic lineage, millions of pounds in luxury property, a family built from the pieces of something that didn't work, and a place inside one of the most watched families on the planet. So let's do this properly. Let's talk about the truth about Princess Beatrice's husband. Most people, when they first encountered the name Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, had one immediate reaction. Who? A property developer. Tall, well-dressed, appeared from nowhere, probably loaded. End of story. Except that is nowhere close to the beginning of the story. Because Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi doesn't just have money, he has history. Old, deep, centuries-spanning history that puts most modern fortunes to shame simply in terms of how long it has been accumulating. The Mapelli Mozzi family holds a hereditary title count granted in 1913 by King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy, bestowed upon all male descendants of the line in perpetuity. Italy abolished its monarchy in 1946 following the Second World War, and with it went the formal recognition of aristocratic titles in legal terms. But families like the Mapelli Mozzis don't simply file away 700 years of identity because a referendum said so. The title persists, it travels, and it landed, very much intact, on Edoardo. But the title is almost the least interesting part. What is genuinely remarkable about the Mapelli Mozzi lineage is just how far back it stretches. According to family history, their ancestry traces all the way to the royal house of Sicily, specifically to descendants of King Federico II, one of the most powerful rulers in medieval European history. Federico II, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Sicily, died in 1250. That means we are not talking about a family that made good in the Victorian era and bought themselves a coat of arms. We are talking about a bloodline that predates the printing press, predates the discovery of the Americas, predates almost every institution that modern people consider ancient. The physical evidence of this history still exists. The Villa Mapelli Mozzi sits in the Lombardy region of northern Italy, a 15th-century estate that began its life as a monastery before being transformed over centuries into one of the most beautiful private properties in the region. Today, it operates as a luxury retreat. Guests can stay there. You can look it up. The frescoes are extraordinary, the gardens immaculate, and the walls breathe with the kind of history that no amount of money can simply purchase. It has to be inherited. So when Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi walked into Princess Beatrice's life, he was not, as some headlines suggested, a commoner marrying up. He was, in a very real historical sense, an aristocrat meeting a royal family that is itself only a few centuries old. Understanding where Edoardo comes from is essential, but it only tells half the story, because for all his extraordinary ancestry, Edoardo is emphatically not a man content to coast on inherited prestige. He is, by any measure, relentlessly driven. His early education followed the classic trajectory of Britain's upper elite. He attended the Dragon School in Oxford, one of the most academically rigorous preparatory schools in the country, before moving on to Radley College. Both institutions are the kinds of places that shape not just what you know, but how you carry yourself. The particular ease with which the privately educated move through professional and social spaces. Edoardo absorbed all of it. He then went to the University of Edinburgh, where he studied politics, graduating with a master's degree. Edinburgh is no finishing school. It is a serious academic institution, and the degree in politics gave Edoardo a framework for thinking about systems, power, and influence that would later inform both his business decisions and his occasional unguarded political opinions. Because here is something the polished image sometimes obscures: Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi has opinions, and he has not always been shy about sharing them. Ahead of the 2016 London mayoral election, he wrote a piece for the trade publication Property Week, calling on whoever won to prioritize central London redevelopment. He named politicians directly. He was critical of Jeremy Corbyn on social media. On the night of the 2016 American presidential election, he used the hashtag #I'mWithHer on Twitter, making his sympathies clear to anyone paying attention. This is notable because it is so unusual. People who marry into royal circles are expected, almost immediately upon entering that orbit, to sand down any political edges they might have and present a carefully neutral face to the world. Edoardo, at least in those earlier years, had not fully adjusted to that expectation. Whether that reflects confidence, naivety, or simply a man who had not yet fully absorbed the constraints of his new position is a matter of interpretation. What it reflects undeniably is someone with a genuine interior life, someone who thinks about the world and feels moved to say so. The business story begins in 2007. Edoardo was 23 years old, fresh from university, armed with connections, family credibility, an eye for design, and an Banda Property, a high-end residential development and interior design company focused on London. The concept, as he described it, was to identify areas of London with underexploited potential and transform them into exceptional homes for a discerning, affluent clientele. This is, on one level, simply the logic of property development. Buy low, at extraordinary value, sell high. But Banda distinguished itself from the beginning through its emphasis on design. This was not just construction. This was the creation of environment spaces that felt considered, curated, and completely unlike anything the existing market was offering. Edoardo, who has spoken openly about living with dyslexia, channeled his way of engaging with the world spatial, visual, deeply intuitive into what Banda became. He describes the design process in almost emotional terms, talking about how a room should feel before he thinks about how it should look. That sensibility translated directly into Banda's reputation. The company became known for interiors that were simultaneously luxurious and livable, theatrical without being grotesque, aspirational without feeling unattainable. By the time Edoardo was appearing in newspapers as Princess Beatrice's partner, Banda had overseen property developments with a combined value exceeding $875 million. That figure is worth sitting with. For a company founded by a 23-year-old with no prior business track record, in one of the most competitive and unforgiving property markets on earth, that represents genuinely exceptional performance. It has not, however, been without turbulence. Critics, including writers at Forbes, pushed back against Banda's stated mission of developing undervalued areas, pointing out that when the company's projects landed in postcodes like Notting Hill, among the most expensive real estate in Britain, the language of regeneration started to feel more like marketing than mission. There is a meaningful difference between revitalizing an overlooked neighborhood and building luxury apartments in one of London's most sought-after addresses and calling it the same thing. Then there was Australia. Banda was connected to a planned development called the Masthead Ocean Club, a high-end beachfront project on Queensland's Gold Coast that generated considerable press attention when it was announced. The renders were beautiful. The ambition was enormous. And then the project collapsed. The company behind it went into administration, and what had been presented as a landmark international expansion for Banda became, instead, an object lesson in the unpredictable nature of large-scale development. Edoardo was, at the moment news of the Australian setback broke, in Palm Beach, Florida, attending a design conference. Whether the timing reflected genuine scheduling coincidence or something more strategic is a question nobody has cleanly answered. What it demonstrated was that in business, as in royal life, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi is extremely good at being somewhere else when things get uncomfortable. Before Princess Beatrice, before the royal wedding, before the photographs on palace steps and the coverage in Hello magazine, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi had a life. A full, complicated, real life. And at the center of that life was a woman named Dara Huang, and later, a small boy named Christopher, though almost everyone who loves him calls him Wolfie. Dara Huang is by any measure a remarkable person. American-born, Harvard-educated, an internationally successful architect and designer with her own thriving firm, HB Design Group. She is sharp, accomplished, and by all available evidence, completely unbothered by the considerable attention her relationship to Edoardo and the royal family has occasionally generated. She and Edoardo became engaged around 2014. They were, by all accounts, a genuinely well-matched couple, two design-minded, ambitious, internationally connected people building a life together in London. In 2016, their son was born. Christopher Wolfe Mapelli Mozzi arrived into a world of privilege, talent, and it would turn out, significant complication. By 2018, the engagement was over. The specific reasons have never been made public. Neither Dara nor Edoardo has chosen to turn their private heartbreak into tabloid entertainment, which, given the world they now move through, takes genuine discipline and maturity. What is known is that they separated, that they established a shared custody arrangement for Wolfie, and that both of them moved forward. What happened next is where the timeline becomes compressed in ways that, inevitably, attracted scrutiny. Within months of the end of his engagement to Dara, Edoardo was seen publicly with Princess Beatrice. The royal gossip machinery spun immediately. Were they together before the engagement formally ended? Had the relationship overlapped? Nobody said anything definitive, and nobody ever has. What can be said is that the proximity of these events, a broken engagement, a new royal romance, a very short stretch of time in between, created an impression that neither party has ever fully managed to dispel. What they have managed, however, is something considerably more impressive than image management. They have created a genuinely functional co-parenting relationship. Dara and Edoardo share time with Wolfie in a way that, by all observable evidence, prioritizes his well-being above anyone's discomfort or ego. Princess Beatrice has embraced her role as Wolfie's stepmother with what appears to be genuine warmth. Extended family members on both sides speak about the arrangement with something approaching admiration. Wolfie himself, photogenic, apparently cheerful, clearly adored, has become something of an unofficial mascot for modern blended family life done well. He appears in family photographs. He accompanies his father and stepmother on the kinds of outings that end up on Instagram. He is, in the clearest possible way, not a complication to be managed. He is simply part of the family. That is an achievement. It doesn't happen by accident. It requires consistent adult decision-making under pressure, across two households, in the full glare of public attention. Whatever complicated feelings may exist privately, publicly, and seemingly genuinely, this co-parenting situation works. The story of how Edoardo and Beatrice found each other is considerably less dramatic than fairy tales typically require. There was no inciting incident, no dramatic first encounter, no moment of electricity across a crowded room between two strangers. They knew each other for years before romance was ever on the table. The Mapelli Mozzi and York families have been connected through friendship for a long time. Edoardo's mother, Nikki Williams Ellis, confirmed at the time of the engagement that her family had known Princess Beatrice for most of her life. These were not two people meeting at a mutual friend's dinner party. These were two families with deep social roots and overlapping world's charity events, private gatherings, the particular social circuit that old money and old titles create. For most of that time, Edoardo was in other relationships, and so was Beatrice. Her long partnership with American businessman Dave Clark ended in 2016. His engagement to Dara Huang ended in 2018, and somewhere in the months that followed, two people who had known each other in a friendly, peripheral way for the better part of 2 decades looked at each other differently. Their relationship became public knowledge in late 2018, though the romance itself had already been underway for several months by then. Their first confirmed public appearance as a couple came in March 2019 at a fundraising event at London's National Portrait Gallery. The photographs were charming. The tabloids were predictably frantic. Who was this man? Why was he standing quite so close to a princess? Was he aware that his suit cost more than most people's monthly rent? The relationship moved quickly. By May 2019, they were attending the wedding of Lady Gabriella Windsor together, a visible and unambiguous signal of seriousness. In September 2019, in Italy, Edoardo proposed. The ring, designed in collaboration with British jeweler Sean Ling, featured a baguette-cut diamond set in a floral design. It was, like everything associated with Edoardo, meticulously considered. On September 26, 2019, Buckingham Palace announced the engagement. The statement from the couple was deliberately low-key. They described themselves as excited to be embarking on a life adventure together and eager to be married. The language was warm, but restrained the tone of people who understood that the spotlight was coming and had no particular desire to encourage it. They had absolutely no idea just how unusual their path to the altar would turn out to be. The original plan was everything you would expect from a royal wedding. The Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace was booked for May 29, 2020. A reception in the grounds of Buckingham Palace was planned. This was going to be a proper, photographed, celebrated, nationally observed royal occasion. Two things happened that turned that plan completely inside out. The first was Prince Andrew. In November 2019, just weeks after the engagement announcement, Beatrice's father gave an interview to the BBC that swiftly became one of the most catastrophic pieces of television in the history of public relations. Andrew's attempt to address questions about his friendship with convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein was so comprehensively unsuccessful that he was effectively stripped of his working royal status almost immediately. The fallout was immediate and enormous, and it landed directly on his daughters. The scale of Beatrice's planned wedding suddenly seemed politically impossible. Something quieter was needed, not as a preference, but as a necessity. The second thing was the pandemic. COVID-19 shut down the entire world in early 2020. Every gathering was cancelled. Every plan was suspended. The Chapel Royal ceremony was postponed indefinitely. The Buckingham Palace reception evaporated. When Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi finally married, it was on July 17, 2020. The venue was the Royal Chapel of All Saints at Royal Lodge in Windsor. The ceremony was private. Attendance was limited to immediate family only. There was no public announcement beforehand. Nobody outside their immediate circle knew it was happening until it was already done. And yet, and this is the remarkable thing, what could have felt like a diminished occasion, a consolation prize of a ceremony, became something genuinely extraordinary in its own right. Beatrice wore a dress that had belonged to her grandmother. Queen Elizabeth II lent her a vintage ivory silk taffeta gown, originally designed by Norman Hartnell in 1962, that the Queen herself had worn to the premiere of the film Lawrence of Arabia. Beatrice also wore the Queen's diamond fringe tiara, the same piece Her Majesty had worn on her own wedding day in 1947. In a ceremony stripped of almost every formal royal trapping, Beatrice somehow ended up wearing the two most historically significant pieces of clothing and jewelry in the entire royal family's possession. The symbolism was overwhelming, even if it was unplanned. A wedding reduced by scandal and pandemic to something small and secret, made luminous by two objects borrowed from the most beloved woman in the family. Prince Andrew walked his daughter down the aisle. He did not appear in the official wedding portraits. His presence was acknowledged in the most private possible way and erased from the public record simultaneously. The message was clear and deliberate. This day belonged to Beatrice and Edoardo. Whatever followed her father would not be allowed to occupy this particular space. After the wedding, life moved with remarkable speed. The couple set up their first home in a 4-bedroom apartment in St. James's Palace, comfortable by most standards, relatively modest by royal ones. Both of them were working. Beatrice had a senior role as vice president of strategic partnerships at the software company Affinity. Edoardo was running Banda. These were two people with genuine professional lives and genuine professional demands, not working royals in the traditional ceremonial sense. By late 2022, they had made a significant change, moving out of the palace entirely and into a 6-bedroom converted farmhouse in the Cotswolds. The property, with its gardens, tennis courts, and outdoor pool, became their countryside sanctuary, the kind of house that suggests a family settling in for the long term. During school weeks they maintained a London base, returning to the countryside for weekends and holidays.